Welcome to the panel discussion titled The Elephant Not in the Room, Labor Supply Shortages. My name is Amina Dib and I'm the Manager of Government and Stakeholder Relations at RESCON. Today I'll be moderating the session, which will feature Bill Ferreira of BuildForce Canada, Andy Brethor of PMA Brethor Realty Group, Andrew Pariser of RESCON, and Rally Chakarova from Bolt. During this session, attendees are encouraged to post questions and comments in Whova. Most of us are aware of the various stats that show the number of construction workers set to retire by 2030, let's say around 100K. There are certainly programs in place to attract young people domestically, while immigration also tends to be looked at. We'll delve into some solutions to this recruitment and retention issue in greater detail during the panel. But first, I'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Bill.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Bill Ferreira. I'm the Executive Director at BuildForce Canada, and we do a lot of data analytics, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with.
Thanks, Bill. Andy?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm involved with builders and developers across Canada and the United States doing market research, sales, and general market intel. So we're thrilled to be able to share what we can with our understanding of markets from our offices in Toronto, Ottawa, Calgary, Kelowna, and Florida. Great to be here.
Thanks, Andy. Andrew?
My name is Andrew Pariser. I'm the Vice President of RESCON. I'm focused on labor supply, labor relations, health and safety, and all things residential construction. And I'm a very proud board member of Bolt.
And Rally. Good segue, Andrew.
Thanks, Amina. Hi, everyone. I'm Rally Chakarova. I'm the Executive Director of the Bolt Foundation. Bolt's mission is to connect under-resourced youth in the GTA to careers in construction, and we do that both in the skilled trades and in other in-demand professions in the industry. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Rally. Great to have you. So now onto some questions, and I'll start with Bill. We've all heard of these stats in passing about the labor supply shortage projections. But what's BuildForce data showing? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a few slides if that would help.
Sure.
Okay. So I focused primarily on the Toronto area, but I do have Ontario slides as well, but I know we're a little bit pressed for time, so I'll just kind of gloss over the Ontario. I think the greater focus here is the Toronto area. So what we've seen, obviously, in 2020 was a significant dip in both employment and the labor force, and that was obviously driven by the pandemic. The unemployment rate shot up to 8.2% in the region. But since then, what we have been seeing is that the labor force or employment in the industry has been growing much faster than the labor force. It's up 9.9% from 2020 levels, which again is not surprising given the decline. But it's the labor force has only grown by 5.6%. So many of those workers that were displaced from the labor force as a result of COVID have been slow to return. And what that did in 2021, as we saw heightened demand for construction, is bring the unemployment rate in the region down to 4.5%, which is just slightly above the 4.3% that was achieved back in 2018. Now, projecting out to 2027, which is our latest outlook, what we're anticipating is that the labor force is going to more or less catch up to employment, and it will more or less mirror it throughout. Up to about 2026 and 2027, at which point then we're going to start seeing a slight decrease in unemployment again. And this little bubble is in part due to, and I'll get into that in a second, our expectations of lower overall employment related to a slight slowdown in construction activity. And that in part is because 2021, 2022 are really very exceptional years in terms of overall activity. And in part that was driven by interest rates. So looking out over the forecast period, we see 2022 is really the peak for construction, for residential construction employment. And again, as interest rates start increasing, we anticipate that that is going to have a bit of a moderating impact on overall employment in the construction sector. This is the red bar here is new construction. So what we're anticipating is that there will be a slight decline in overall employment for new construction. At the same time, and this is not unique to Toronto, but it's certainly a feature that we see in areas with very mature markets, the renovation market is expected to increase. And in part, that's because when typically you have a hot real estate market, renovations usually follow the transaction. So when houses are sold, typically the new owners want to customize the location to their own preferences, and that typically leads to additional construction activity, renovation activity, and that's what we're seeing here is a growth in the renovation market. There's also another factor, which is really the aging of the population, and most people that are existing homeowners want to age in place. They don't necessarily want to downsize. They've paid off their home and they want to continue to live there as long as they can. That requires a degree of modification to the home to customize it so that they can continue to live there. The other thing that we are seeing is, again, related to the aging of the housing stock, is a slight increase in overall maintenance demands. By and large, we anticipate that the average employment in the industry will be about 87,500 workers, which is just slightly down from the 90,100 we reached we're expecting to reach in 2022. And again, 2022 is a peak. When we look at housing starts and household formations, on average, we've been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40,000 to 42,000, going back to 2011. Obviously, what we saw with housing starts in 2019 was a decline, and some of that was driven by factors external to the pandemic. But as a result of the pandemic and people spending more time at home, we did start to see a pickup in housing starts, which peaked essentially in 2021. And again, due to rising interest rates, we anticipate that it's going to moderate somewhat right out to about 2023 and then essentially flatline and pick up again towards 2027, the tail end of our outlook. What you are seeing is, and this is why we monitor household formations, it is the primary driver. And this decline here is really related to immigration and travel restrictions that were put in place to control the pandemic. As a result, household formations declined significantly in 2021. But we are expecting, as the economy reopens and those travel restrictions are lifted, that again, immigration will pick up again, and that will start increasing overall formations, which typically will then drive housing starts. Looking out again over our outlook period, we monitoring investment in both new housing and renovations. Again, this is the spike that was really experienced this past year. And as you can see, new housing construction was up significantly. And again, we do expect to see a bit of a drop over the next couple of years. And by drop, it's a very minor drop, but it will be some leveling out and then remaining relatively steady right through to about 2026 and then picking up again. At the same time, and this is what I was talking about vis-a-vis renovations, what we continue to see, and this has been an ongoing trend even going back to 2011, but it's slow and it's kind of accelerating. Is the pace of renovation activity does seem to be accelerating, and we're expecting to see many more individuals, and some of the individuals displaced, currently employed in new housing, moving over to renovations. Overall, during this period, we see the labor force, because demand will be slightly lower, declining. So demand for construction workers is expected to decline ever so slightly. At the same time, we have nearly 15,000 workers exiting the labor force, which is about 15.8% of the 2021 labor force. During that period, and again, this is based on current recruitment rates, we anticipate just that under 10,000 workers will join the industry, recruited locally or recruited locally in the region, leaving the industry with a gap of about 4,000, just under or just over 4,600 workers that will need to be filled from outside the region. Now, one of the challenges that's going to be experienced is that all regions in the province seem to be going through the same sort of challenges right now. There is not a region in Ontario that isn't experiencing very tight labor markets. So pulling workers in from other regions is going to become increasingly more challenging for the sector in the GTA. Am I almost out of time, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could cut you off rudely in a couple of seconds, or I could
cut me off.
Yeah.
Cut me off rudely. If there are questions about Ontario, I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. Thank you, Bill. So, I mean, you talked a bit about where we're at, and part of it is the pandemic and immigration. But Andy, like, how did we get here? Is there a systemic issue about just labor supply in general, why people aren't getting into construction, don't want to stay? Can you tell me more about that?
Let's start with a big picture, Amina, and I'll try to be quick, and we'll confuse everybody probably quite appropriately as we blast through this. But you know, the GGH, the Greater Golden Horseshoe, is about 10,000 square miles. Currently 10.1 million people. It projected to 14.5 million in the next 10 years. So we've got a continuing pressure of growth here, which is quite remarkable. The GDP of this neighborhood's 450 billion, and I only point that out because it's 25% of Canada's GDP. So this is the engine of Canada right here within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. That population growth has been enormous, 212 to 222, nearly 33% as we move from 7.5 million to 10.1. So it's just been remarkable. A lot of that driven by immigration, but also interprovincial movement too. And of course, then what happened was this enormous movement in price because of constriction of supply. And I'll just talk about that in a second. But this enormous movement in price, if I asked you what the average price of a home sold for in Toronto in 2005, I think you'd be surprised that I told you it was $335,000. I think you'd be shocked. In 1996, it was 200 grand. 25 years ago. Unbelievable. A movement of over 200% in the last 10 years. Just bizarre, unsustainable. Let me give you just a quick comparison as I try to put it in perspective for you, because we're trying to compete within North America for labor supply. We're trying to compete for jobs. And if I compare Toronto to Houston, or that Greater Golden Horseshoe to Houston, Houston is exactly the same population, slightly less, about 9.1 million, exactly the same size, 10,000 square miles. You think of Houston as the great sprawl. Well, it is. It's a little different in terms of its conurbation and how it forms. Its GDP is 500 billion, about 650 billion, so quite bigger GDP than Toronto. The average house price, growth there has been just slightly less than 2% a year, population growth, where GGH is 3%. So it's slightly less on the growth scale, but the fastest growing city in the United States. Its average house price today is $400,000, 520 Canadian. Houston, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. I think somebody said that. Toronto became the most expensive city in Canada just this month. At $1.2 million is our average household price. That puts us number 1 in Canada and number 2 in the world as the most unaffordable city in the world. Why? Approval process. I'll just give you a quick comparison. If I go to Houston, I walk into the mayor's office in Houston, I get a plan approved in 18 months from zero, purchasing the land to actually digging, putting a shovel in the ground. In the GTH, it takes 10 years on average, 10 years, from 18 months to 10 years. Zoning restrictions are significantly less. The growth plan that occurred in 2005 really was the no growth plan. Intensification worked, and that was the objective, and it absolutely worked. And we flipped. Bill's graph was beautiful. 40,000 units a year. It's the last 25 years. We haven't gone up. We haven't gone down. A little bit either side of 40,000 units in the GTA. It's unbelievable, really, with the growth in population, but the actual housing production has been flat. We flipped it from 25,000 single family or low density housing to 35,000 high rise and only 10,000 single family or low rise development. Houston this year will produce over 60,000 single family homes alone, singularly, probably close to 80,000 just within its conurbation. So we've got an issue of supply that we created by decree. It was by government decree. It was by the restriction under the growth plan of suburban development. We've got to wrap our heads around that. Scotiabank study just released some months ago showed that Canada is of the G7 has the lowest per capita number of housing units in that whole G7 group of countries. We need 1.8 million new housing units just to meet with demand. So, Bill, if we're producing 250,000 units a year, which is a record year this past year, normally it's closer to around 200,000, we'd have to double that, 250,000 more per year for the next 10 years just to catch up. What's the likelihood of that happening? Not really very good. When Bill points forward of demands on labor supply, imagine if we could let loose the market to actually try to meet demand. We don't have the labor supply in hand now to meet what we're doing, and we should be doubling our production just to maintain levels where we're at.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, I see Andrew has the other Andrew has his hand up.
I was just gonna say, the other message I hear you saying, Andy, is not only this is a place where people want to live, it's probably going to be a place people want to work as well. So I was just going to add that comment in.
Let's hope so. Hewlett Packard just moved their entire head office and staff of 10,000 people to Houston because of house prices. Will they move to a place like Toronto? I think we're under severe strain. We're competing in North America for jobs, and we're going to be under severe strain given our current house prices. And they moved there because of house prices. Now we've got a tremendous base, but our GDP is as flat as a pancake. We haven't focused on business investment in this country for a long time. It's down 28% over the last 4 years. So we've got a storm cloud developing over us where we've got a continuing movement. What was the largest source of supply of immigration to Canada in 2021 last year? What country in the world produced the most number of new immigrants? And by the way, we hit 400,000 despite COVID. What country? Canada. How bizarre.
Sorry, I'm just gonna jump in there again because both you and Andrew mentioned work, and so I'm gonna kick it over to Rally just because this is what she does. She helps people get work in
Rally, go for it.
So obviously one of the ways to get talent is to recruit and train locally. What's Bolt doing on this front?
Thanks, Amina. And I think Bill and Andy set the foundation really well here because we do need more people to get into the workforce with some of the, supply issues on housing and the promises that have been made by the province on houses that are needed. We need people to actually build those houses. So immigration is certainly one way to go, but the other really great opportunity, and as you said, that is where we work, is to develop the local supply. So I think the approach to recruiting locally is very different than doing so through immigration, and it has different challenges and opportunities. So as I mentioned, our target demographic is youth 29 years of age or younger who are experiencing barriers to training and accessing the labor market. But the challenges on recruitment are very similar across the board. And we approach those through 5 strategies that our programming is based on and that we've seen are needed and are successful. So I'll just list them for you here, and then I'll dive a little bit more and provide more context. So the first is raising awareness. The second is immersive career exploration. The third is financial support. The fourth is client-focused and objective career development advice. And the fifth, and probably the most important one, is industry partnerships. Mm-hmm. So these build on each other, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how. So I think we're all aware that there's still stereotypes about the industry and those that work within it. And I'll give big kudos here, because I don't think we've ever had as strong champions as Ministers McNaughton and Dunlop to sort of help change that narrative and really encourage people to join, especially the skilled trades in that context. However, these are really broad-based views, and we just need that consistent and ongoing push. So what we know is that we need to increase knowledge and we need to increase interest in construction careers. So shameless promotion on our Speak Out program here. And what it does is it takes industry professionals in schools and other youth-based community or employment programs for a career day type presentation where they share their personal experiences and advice directly with students. Very much that seeing is believing kind of thing. And we call that, planting the seed. So we do have a special one for International Women's Day coming up with an all-female panel featuring a journey, person's team fitter, an architect, an urban designer, an acoustical engineer, and a finishing superintendent, among others. And this is really important to us because we know women are still, really underrepresented. And thanks to some data that Bill shared with us on site and construction, it's as little as 4%, which is insane when you see that women make up more than half of the population. But the work that we're doing on the awareness part is not just with youth, and it actually has to do a lot more as well with the influencers in their lives. So that is parents, teachers, guidance counselors, guardians, caseworkers, you name it, anybody that youth talk to about what they'd like to be and the careers they'd like to get into. And the reason for that is because these influencers might hold and perpetuate these negative stereotypes and actually discourage youth from pursuing them. And we also wanted to kind of show what the work in the industry looks like, because I think people's stereotypical image is not always reflective of what the industry looks like and some of the innovation and sustainability that's come into it over the past few years. So we created a video series called Careers in Construction. It's on Bolt's YouTube channel, and that adds another resource to ones like Job Talks. And it actually shows what a person in particular profession does on a day-to-day basis and how that works all together, to build buildings. But I think my favorite program is certainly the immersive career exploration. And what that looks like is we actually take youth directly on a live construction site so they can experience for themselves what the culture looks like, what the environment looks like, and what the work looks like and feels like. So our job shadowing program in particular helps connect youth with real life professionals and help them grow their network within the industry. Incredibly important because a lot of the job opportunities, especially in the skilled trade side, remain informal. They're the, do you know somebody? And if they don't know you, then it's not like you can, go on LinkedIn or Indeed and apply for these positions. So it's a great way for youth to actually enter the industry. The third one is financial support. And we offer that both through a scholarship program, and applications for that are open right now for those that are going to school in September. And that is for students that are pursuing post-secondary related, construction related programs in either college or universities. So that might be engineering, architecture, project and construction management, among many others. On the skill training side, we work with relevant union training centers and pre-apprenticeship programs that show good employment outcomes. And we help cover the cost of any training, including proper PPE, workwear, and a starter toolkit. And this, I think, is a bit of a surprise for many because the argument tends to be, but there's so many, tax benefits and grants for people in the skilled trades, to help cover the cost of those. But that comes after a year, not at the front investment, which can run up to $2,000 if you need to get all of that stuff in order to be able to get started on work. And the other two factors I think are pretty unique to us and the way we do it. And I think that's what really makes our success. And that's really focusing on the retention as much as we focus on recruitment. Our team works with youth one-on-one. We identify their career interests and goals. We assess their skills and gaps. We create an individual plan based on existing opportunities. And I really want to stress the existing here, not, dream up in the sky once. And we hope to maneuver through a very complex and outdated system. And again, I'll give a shout out to Minister McNaughton here and the Youth Apprenticeship Advisors, Andrew, who are, actively working to streamline that system and make it easier for individuals. But the objective career advice is a huge value add that we provide. And unfortunately, other employment service providers and even specific and fairly new pre-apprenticeship programs lack because they don't have that experience on how the industry and the pathways actually work. And lastly, but this is certainly our own success factor, is our partnership with industries. So our success really comes from partners like Tridel, who is Bolt's principal and founding sponsor, and who's been leading the way on this. So we work with employers who realize that they're facing shortages and that will restrain their ability to take on new or more contracts and therefore expand their own business. So the difference with our employers, though, is that they're also committed to finding a new talent pipeline that we provide that offer training and accommodations to ensure retention, and that institute a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I meant by that is that they ensure new recruits are connected with a supervisor who can be a mentor, who can demonstrate some patience, and really be a constructive training approach and a positive experience so that someone actually stays, sees their apprenticeship through, builds their career in the industry, and doesn't exit because of a negative experience. And I would say that's just really, really important, especially when talking about attracting and retaining the underrepresented groups that we don't see in the construction industry.
Thanks, Riley. And I was going to go to Andrew, but a question just came in that I think both Andrew and Riley can answer. So I'll let you guys decide who starts. But the question from the audience is, I'm curious what plans are in place systemically to attract people to the construction industry. There are perceived and real barriers for young people, people of color, and women. For example, the macho and aggressive nature of construction does not appeal to the majority of Canadians. How is the industry competing with other more attractive areas of work? So maybe Andrew, if you want to start, since I didn't ask the question that I was going to ask you, and then Riley, if you want to add.
Yeah, I think first we're starting to admit to it. So we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, construction is an excellent industry to work in. We offer excellent wages. We offer excellent benefits and pensions. We did a study that shows workers in construction on average are happier than the average Canadian, but we're also owning up to where we have shortfalls. And so we are trying to invest more in DEI, onboarding, orientation, mentorship. But this is something that we probably should have started investing in 25, 30 years ago. And so we have a bit of catch up to do. So I guess the first step is to admit you have a problem. It doesn't mean that it's not a great industry to be in, but we certainly, we're not perfect yet. So we have more to do, but I'll turn it back to Riley.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And I think that's such a great and important question, and something that really comes up a lot in people's minds. And that's what I was sort of getting to about working with employers who understand the value of creating that positive and inclusive workspace. And Andrew's completely right. Admitting that there's a problem is absolutely the first step. The second is what you do about it. And, I'm honored to sit on the RESCON's anti-racism table that sort of discusses those things and looks at what some of the training and other options are. But what I'd like to say to that question is, system change doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually. And I'd like to say to our youth and our industry mentors that we work with that we are doing that change right now. The youth that we work with is 85% of them are racialized. So going back to some of our alumni who have started in the industry and they were the first person of color for that company, and now they're the fourth and fifth and sixth. And these are people like our alumni are becoming our mentors, and are providing that support for new people that are underrepresented that come into the industry, making it a better environment, and learning from their own personal experiences about what they would have liked to have and what they would have liked to see, and sort of passing that on. And I think that's where the difference is really happening, that the more underrepresented groups that we continue to attract in the industry, the more the industry will change, because they will be the ones that change them. We just have to make sure that we institute policies in place that are, zero tolerance for discrimination and harassment, and we ensure that there's a culture that people feel safe in and can foster and advance in.
Mm-hmm. Really important, like mentorship, having mentors on site.
Can I just put in a quick plug?
For sure.
Yeah, BuildForce has been focused on this question for some time, and what we've done is we've made free tools to support employers with that transition. We have a policy framework for creating a respectful, inclusive workplace, as well as an implementation guide that has policies and procedures. Again, you can get it from our website for free and adopt it straight into your policy manuals, as well as look at the procedures and ways that you can actually implement that on site. And again, the tool was developed specifically to provide SMEs working in this industry that may not have a lot of time to focus on issues such as this, with policies and procedures to actually deal with trying to implement a respectful, inclusive workplace.
Thanks, Bill. Certainly a good resource to check out. I have another question from the audience, but I just want to flag that we have less than 8 minutes left, which is going to include my closing. So I'll pose this question to the group. How much would building more housing components in factories alleviate the worker supply issues?
It's already happening. What will it's a natural reaction by corporations or companies when your labor market, either through excessive wage movement or shortage of supply, means I moved productivity based on innovation, and that's AI and prefab manufactured component parts. Greg Gulf's already doing it. Madam, doing it big time throughout both in Canada and the United States. It will relieve some of the pressure, and over time, gosh, it may take some time, but it doesn't help the labor force. The labor force, of course, diminishes by the introduction of those two component parts of tech and prefab. So that's a major trend where the industry's going. And if we continue along the path of constricted supply and strong demand and no labor, the transition to technology and support is going to be enormous.
Certainly, I think it's already happening with some of RESCON members, but one thing we didn't really touch on that too much, aside from the stats that Bill provided, was the immigration component. And so obviously, I think domestic recruitment and retention does go hand in hand with like immigration. Andrew, do you want to talk a bit about some changes that maybe need to be made at the federal and provincial level to get more immigrants who have skilled trades background to come to Canada to work and live?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that has to be said is construction, but specifically residential construction, is immigration. You look at the waves of immigration that have come to Canada and Toronto, and literally they've found a home in residential construction. And so where we haven't done so well with getting women into construction, we have done an excellent job getting immigrants into residential construction. And our workforce is, predominantly based on, people from anywhere from Portugal to Brazil, Eastern Europe. And so immigrants have found a home within residential construction. I think talking about this, as Richard did in his opening remarks, we have to recognize what's going on in the world. It's incredibly sad to see people's homes being destroyed. And we need to, as we look at immigration, be cognizant of what's going on globally. And I think we need to, and the federal government is doing this, we need to be able to accept people from everywhere when tragedies occur. And as we do that, there's a role for both the federal government and the provincial government. We've been able to work very closely with the provincial government, and they're ready to make the changes that we need to make. And what we need is changes from our federal partners. And so specifically, without getting into the weeds, construction is viewed, especially by bureaucrats, as one sector. That's not true. Construction is 7 sectors and they're distinct. There's also disparity between how we value compulsory trades and voluntary trades. And essentially what we need is we need to increase the value that we place on voluntary trades. And so that, by that, I mean the people who do basement forming, the people that frame our houses, the people that do high-rise forming, the people that do the finishing trades, so install trim or tiles. And if we do that, we'll administratively remove the barriers. I think we also have to work with the existing employers who have
Andrew,
to start.
Can I just ask you a question for a second? Isn't it true at the moment that our current immigration policy skewers those groups of people completely? It's almost hopeless for them to qualify under our current immigration system, and the feds really need to adapt that dramatically. And they could turn that tap around just like that. And secondarily, your comment with Ukraine at the moment, my goodness, what a wonderful opportunity to offer refugee status immediately to what is hundreds of thousands of skilled labor if they wanted to come. But I throw that out.
I maybe I'll just wrap up because I know we're pressed for time. Mm-hmm. I think Canada is a place where people want to live and people want to work. And I think if we can remove the administrative barriers, we can tackle this labor supply issue, because the truth is our labor force has shown how adaptive they are with the COVID crisis, their ability to adapt. And so if we can get the regulation out of the way and we can create opportunities for people to come in, they're going to face similar obstacles to what Raleigh explained for domestic workers. But with a little bit of support, a little bit of removal of administrative barriers, I'm not worried about finding 100,000 if we can make it easier for people to get here.
Yeah. So Andrew, you kind of answered my last closing question, which I will ask everyone except for Andrew to answer within seriously 10 seconds or less each. So looking ahead, what's the one thing that can be done in the short term that would have a positive impact on the labor supply? Raleigh first, then Bill, then Andy, and then I'm going to cut you all off because we have to switch to the next session. You're on mute.
I think that cut into my 10 seconds. Is a donation to Bolt so we can continue doing the work that we're doing too on the nose.
Perfect. Bill.
I think Andrew touched on it, and Andy did as well. Immigration reform. Stop focusing on individuals that are going to be competing with our children for essentially professional jobs that require university master's degrees, and let's start focusing on the people that we need in the country.
Okay, quickly, Andy.
I'll just add one little point. I think it behooves the industry leaders, business people, company owners, sole proprietors, get out in the community, offer your mentorship and scholarship, and maybe it's little wee steps at a time, but outreach and bring both for diversity and equality, but also for the skill, and make that effort to get out there in the community and put your money where your mouth is.
Right. So with that, I'm going to close out the panel, and I thank all the panelists for their participation, and to those in the audience who participated and asked questions. I'll give you guys 30 seconds to catch the very last segment of today's Housing Supply Summit, which is Richard Lyle, the president of RESCON, who will provide some closing remarks and reflections on the summit. So thanks, everyone.